I think we're here.
Are we here? Okay, my phone is going to keep drifting. But such is life.
Okay.
Good morning, Lisa. Are you recording on Zoom?
I am. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Thank you
right.
for
I
reminding me, though.
forgot.
I almost forgot. It takes two, at least.
An extra brain would be handy. Yeah.
I mean, we are interdependent creatures, right? And
For sure.
we do function better knowing that and remembering that in humility and grace.
I've been reading about the microbiome, and we don't live without depending on other creatures, not just other humans.
Yeah. Looks like one of my friends, Kathleen, is here. That's exciting. Hi, Kathleen. If it's the Kathleen I think it is. You know, the Instagram handles are sometimes fun. It's like, who's who?
Yeah, and it's so exciting to have someone here. So I'll try and look and make sure I can see if there are questions or comments.
Yeah.
But otherwise, usually we just take a topic and go.
I know. We just are like, what's here today?
Yeah. What is here today for you, Lisa?
Oh gosh. You know, it's been a really rich time for me. Like, I feel like it's always a rich time, but there's a lot going on in my astrological chart, a lot going on with parts of my chart that really have to do with like core foundational knowing, and then an invitation to deepen into that core foundational knowing. And then in those moments of like invitation to go deeper, the habitual or the patterning will rise to kind of counter, because it knows itself, right? And it's kind of fighting for its survival, and it doesn't want to be left behind with this deepening, right? So it's kind of like, hey, remember me? Like, remember how you need to be vigilant, and you need to be, there's scarcity, and there's, don't trust, and, you know, have doubt, and like all those realities of my childhood, you know, come and they try to convince me or us, you know, that they're still true. And then I look around, I'm like, not actually true. However, boy, you know, so the level shifting.
So let's slow down a minute.
Yeah, there's a lot in that, right?
That was a huge chunk. And let's treat this like a movement lesson and make it really concrete. So can you give us a concrete example, even if it's fictional, a concrete example of what it means to be deepening, and then what it looks or feels like to have things from the past rise up?
Right. So my sense of deepening, and Maria, I so want to hear like how this is resonating for you, but I'm going to disrupt that curiosity and try to actually answer your question. But I'm also like, but I want to know how this is landing for you. So for me, the deepening in my life in general is a co-creation with life, is a trust in the movement of life as it's being created in the moment. And that's like this growing invitation for me, to be aware of that co-occurrence, but what will come up is, again, the reality of my young years, whereas like there's nothing to really be trusted. People aren't trustable, situations aren't trustable, life is not trustable.
Okay. So I want to go even more concrete, and if you don't have a story, let's see if I can come up with a story.
Well, how it can come up succinctly is just
different
like
sets of earbuds.
Oh.
Because one goes to Zoom and the other goes to IG. Can you hear me on Instagram?
I can. And let me just give you a real general this is somewhat concrete, but it just can be even like the stories that I'm telling myself about somebody that I'm in relationship with. It doesn't have to be romantic or sexual. It could be like one of my platonic lovers.
Yeah.
And there'll be like a skepticism that comes in and like, oh, they don't really XYZ, or like
Mm.
almost a slight, a doubt, a disbelief,
Mhm.
um, yeah, that kind of resonance, um, where counter to the actual evidence, those thoughts will sneak in and doubt and convince and try to convince me of
Yeah.
bad things, or just bad things are coming, or like that kind of, which is very
That's
common for us as survivors, you know.
that's so interesting because again, reading about the microbiome,
Mm.
when people try to change their diet, they
Mm.
often experience a detox reaction. And it's not that the new supposedly healthier diet is harmful to them. It's just that the body's having a reaction to changing its environment.
Right. Yes.
And in movement, I've heard students say um, that there's really a feeling of more ease and yet at the same time more anxiety because it
Hmm.
starts to feel unsafe.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they do for detox, but in movement, what we would say is then back off a little, right? Because
Hmm.
it is really hard to deepen when something is pulling you back. So we back
Absolutely.
off a little. So how
Right.
does that work in your world?
Yeah. In my world, it's slow down. So it's similar.
Slow down.
Slow
Yeah.
down and connect to what I say, the actual factual.
Oh,
Keep
tell
connected.
me.
So the actual factual is just what is undeniably self-evident.
Okay.
And so, for example, um, there's warmth in the center of my palms. There's a spicy feeling in my, or sense in my mouth because I'm drinking my favorite chai.
Yeah.
Um, there's like a little bit of holding in my belly. Um, there's hundreds of sensations that are happening right now,
Mm-hmm.
and the actual factual is just noticing them. It's
Mm-hmm.
not judging the holding in my belly or the spiciness in my mouth. It's just observing or witnessing, because it is what it is. And when we use that part of the brain to connect to what simply is, whether we like it or not, we don't have to like it. I can be like,
Right.
I hate XYZ, but I'm going to just name it as it is.
Yeah.
When we do that, our brains and nervous systems regulate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of really, no, it's actually everything. It's so important, right? Like it's really, yeah, it is really important. So that's what I
Yeah.
do is when I'm spinning out, even just so slightly, a doubting thought for me at this point is a bit of a spinning out. Not
Mm.
not 100%, right? Context is always everything.
Right.
But if I have a familiar what I call a predictable thought pattern, and it's kind of going to lead to what I know as a slight dysregulation, then
Mm-hmm.
I know how to regulate. I know the tools and the
Yeah.
practices and the toys to regulate my brain and nervous system. And so slowing down to being with what is actually here and now,
Yeah.
slowly, with compassion and some patience,
Yeah.
is pretty important for me. This is
Yeah. And
kind of the work
it's
that,
interesting because here and now, I'm sorry, it sounds like there's more you want to
no,
say.
no, 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 you go.
It sounds here and now is actually trickier than I think. Oftentimes I catch myself because when I sit down, I try to do a lesson a day.
Hmm.
And when I lie down to do a lesson, it can be really difficult not to project ahead to how I might feel after the lesson.
Oh, yeah.
Like if I'm deepening, where will I be when I'm
Right.
deeper? I have to back away from that. And that
Mhm.
that for me is one of the biggest challenges.
Absolutely. It's like a real investment in the process of the moment,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
trusting that the moment that we're in is enough.
Yeah.
And we don't know what will come afterwards. So when you're in the lesson, or I'm in my chanting, or I'm in my meditation, or I'm just dropping down for a moment, or I'm just meditation for me is kind of a all the time on some level, just checking in,
Yeah.
like really. I'm not doing it because I know. I mean, I know it does regulate my brain, but I'm doing it because there's a resonance of it.
Mm.
I'm actually connecting with truth when I do that. By truth, I
Mhm.
mean
Mhm.
the nature of reality.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so that has a different resonance. And yet we have these human minds and this culture that's so interested in production and
Mhm.
result and outcome. So
Yeah.
absolutely, it's like the invitation to really come back to enjoy the lesson, whatever that actually means,
Yeah.
right? So the lesson that you're doing, like maybe you could speak to that, like the lesson that you're doing that day. It might be exquisite, it might be uncomfortable, it might be awkward, it might be like fill in the blank. And what do you invite yourself to stay connected with, regardless of how it, like your experience of it in the moment? Does that make sense?
Mhm. Right. So in the moment, the most important thing for me, um, just because of my makeup, right? Someone else might have to focus on another part to bring themselves back. But for me, it's staying curious
Mm-hmm.
and letting go of the certainty that I actually know what's going on. I have to stop and say, it doesn't matter how many times I've moved my arm in this way before. I bet there are ways of moving this arm that I have not yet discovered. And sure enough, when I can just get into that really open and curious place,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I do discover something. And it may
Yeah.
not seem earth shattering, but it is in the sense that, wow, I've broken this barrier of knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple things that are coming up. One is that the mundane is the profound, and I find that to be true.
Yeah.
However, we humans love fireworks, and so we miss the whatever we want to call it. We miss the profundity because we're out of time. We're in our fantasy expectation space.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to connect to, and I know Kathleen has been in your been
Yeah.
a student as well of yours, is that in moments when I've been in your classes, there'll definitely be moments where without that curiosity and what I would call a beginner's mind, or like a willingness
Hmm.
to pause what I think is happening or where it's going or where it's been, but just to be with what it is now, it opens the space for that newness to arise just spontaneously.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
remember, like, probably in some of my earliest classes with you, like, what are we up to?
I know.
Because that's just like, that's a very strong part of my psyche, is like wanting to figure out and wanting to know, and certainty, and all
Hmm.
that stuff, and like some vigilance. And so
Yeah.
it took me a while, a few sessions to really get the resonance of what we're up to. And I think that might be true a lot of times for my clients as well. Is like it
Yeah.
takes a while for them to realize, like, oh, we're really just in discovery, and that's like the miracles of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And you might not, like a person might not get that on the first session, because it is a whole thought, it's a different thought technology that you and I are engaging with in our work,
Yeah.
and it's counterintuitive, based on our culture and what we're trained
Yeah.
to orient to.
It's so different. And I'm curious if Kathleen is still here, if she has anything she wants to type in the comments or a question related to that, because so feel free, Kathleen, if you're here to type away, I'll just keep talking until I see something. But it's true. Most newbies come to a lesson and say, but what am I supposed to be doing?
Hmm.
What am I supposed to feel?
Mm.
And the answer is always, I don't know. It's
Yeah,
your body.
yeah. And that brings us, and maybe Kathleen will post something and maybe she won't, but that brings me full circle back to like this moment in time, or this. not necessarily just this one, but in general these days, like,
Yeah.
can I use the same thought technology, right? Can I come back and not know,
Oh, I see.
period? Can I come back to not knowing if X dynamic is sustainable, or X situation is like is a match? And I'm just thinking of all the tendrils in my life with regards to organizations and people and places, and just so many dynamics, because how we do one thing is how we do everything. And so it's like this willingness to stay true and connected and and curious and in beginner's mind, and not jump to this I have to know, and like it's not lining up how I want, and the expectation, like all that
Yeah.
stuff that just like the micro of the lesson of what comes up in the lesson comes in the macro of life, right?
Oh,
So I'm just
yeah.
feeling like the full circle, like the relevance of everything that you're saying, in all
It
of
is
this.
relevant.
Yeah.
It is relevant. And Kathleen is saying, when I'm in a session with Anna, I'm usually trying hard to follow the instructions. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that Anna keeps reminding me to go slow and small movements. Oh, interesting. So if we generalize that sort of to life.
Yeah. Well, instructions in your work, I feel like are really important. Like just to follow the instructions that you're saying, but not more than that. Like not read into your instructions and not misinterpret your instructions, which I can't tell you how many times that happens in my one-on-one work. People will be like, "But you said blah blah blah." I'm like, I have
Yeah.
no, I actually didn't, but I
Right.
understand. So the
Right.
instructions or the invitations that you offer in your lessons, or that I might offer in my lessons, to stay really slow with them, right? And yeah, I mean, I'm really feeling it. I'm having flashbacks into lessons too, of just like just following the simple instructions and then feeling what comes next,
Yeah.
not going ahead.
And not going ahead. And what's interesting to me is you were talking about, and I'm not using your
Hmm.
words, so
Yeah,
correct
that's okay.
me
Yeah.
as necessary. Is that how can you were saying something along the lines of how can I step back and
Hmm.
be in this moment differently, essentially,
Yeah.
without all the other lenses and perceptions that I normally would have. And can this be different? And to me, that sort of plays out on the mat, because
Hmm.
in a class, a group class, you can see people responding to the same invitation very differently,
Yeah.
right? Like there's people doing all sorts of things, and as long
Yeah.
as they're not hurting themselves, that's cool. And of course, what everyone's feeling is totally different. So I'm always shocked and glad that in life, like the person standing next to me is going to have a totally different reaction to the same thing that just happened right in front of us. I
Yeah.
might think someone was sarcastic and rude, and they're like, they're so friendly.
Yeah.
And I'm
Right.
like, really? How did that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like um, a heart tenderness with that, like just that we can't help but see through a certain lens sometimes, and project what isn't actually there. And then the willingness to ask curious questions is just not a part of our repertoire as
No.
human beings. So we don't even know to seek clarification. We just run with the judgment, or we just run with the
Right.
assumption, and then we just get more and more separation,
Yeah.
which is kind of, yeah, like that's why we are where we are in a way in our culture, is because there's a lot of separation.
There's a lot of separation. But
Mm.
Kathleen is saying that when she's in a session with you, you
Mm.
always bring her back to the actual factual, the pause, and tuning into
Mm.
what's happening now.
Mm. Mhm.
So how would that apply in a situation where I'm standing there with another person and we both have completely different interpretations of
Yeah.
what's happening in front of us?
Well, if our brains are somewhat regulated, we'll be able to access that curiosity in beginner's mind to seek clarity,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Or to ask, like, oh, huh, like yeah, I want to know, like, I want to know more of your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Or would you be willing to hear my experience?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And instead, like, just in my moments, I will close down, or the other person will close down. And then they'll just kind of be, again, the separation of two people, like, not in what I call we-ness. We-ness to
Yeah.
me is like the most exquisite place to be. And it's really what I am drawn toward in all
Yeah.
the areas of my life. And it takes a lot of care to have that in a traumatized culture.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the curiosity and the willingness to learn, like, what someone else's experience is, and like, ask questions without assumption, like, did you mean that? Or like, ooh, when you said that, I felt this. Like, are, I wanted, like, what's happening, and um,
Yeah.
I get that that's vulnerable work and hard to do.
It is. Kathleen is saying the hardest part for me is letting go of judgment to be able to be curious. When I'm in mostly judgment, I get on what I
Mm.
call the train that's heading for a train wreck.
Yeah, I've been discerning. Um, let's see, I've been discerning my levels of judgment and curiosity, and like, as if they're on a scale, and um, another. I mean, there's many ways of saying that judgment, and the scales of judgment and inclusive love, or judgment and we-ness, a judgment or usness. Like, where is the usness? When I'm in judgment, the judgment takes me out of that, and there's just certainty of, I felt this and you did that,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of,
Yeah.
um, when you did that, I felt that, and can you tell me more? Like, what was happening for you when you did that? Or just
Right.
this willingness to learn from the other person is so hard when our defenses are up,
Right.
and
And
particularly when we're in a culture that's really oppressing, some folks more than others. That defensiveness and that protection is valid, right? It's valid.
right. And
Um,
I'd
yeah.
like to talk more about that because I don't know if we were recording when we started, but we started talking about how humbling it is to do these talks and have to get familiar with the tech all over again.
Yeah.
Um, and it has been very humbling for me since the beginning of 2022 to realize that I always thought of myself as someone with a certain window of regulation.
Mm, mm.
But that is context dependent. And so when I finally had one too many stressors,
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, we could
Mhm.
conceptualize it as either the window closing or just having one too many insults. But say we
Mhm.
were talking about health. I'm a healthy person. I eat a healthy diet. I exercise, blah, blah, blah. But you throw one too many things at me, I'm going to get
Mhm.
sick. And
Mhm.
so if we're talking judgment, love, or whatever terms you want to use, at a certain point, I just got to the point where all I could do was protect,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? All I could do was protect. And luckily, I had the reserve not to lash out with it,
Yeah.
right? So that's always like my number one. But I did not have uh, enough reserve to actually work within that window. And where I'm going with this, I know this is long winded, where I'm going with this is that I've been thinking a lot about what it takes to create the conditions in order to be in
Yeah.
love, health, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely.
So let's get on that road of talking about
Yeah.
creating the conditions.
Yeah. I've been pondering that a lot as well, a lot, lately, with
Tell me.
regards to marginalized, folks, whether it's skin color, sexual orientation, gender orientation, like. So I want to come back to that, but I also want to just pause and take a half step back. When
Yeah.
you said I don't something like I had something about protection, like you had to,
Hmm.
and I don't remember if you said everywhere or always or but I'm wondering if in that time that you're referencing, if you've had to be protected or protect yourself like 100% or just in certain dynamics or contexts, or like was it literally all the time?
Great question. So, what I've realized for myself when I get into those too much moments is
Mm-hmm.
that I create the conditions for myself to succeed by narrowing my world.
Uh-huh.
So I am not in a negative way, but like
Yeah.
I have enough reserve to deal with this right now.
Yes, yes.
And and so I just started like, and we do this with the movement lessons too, but I just started jettisoning stuff like
Yeah.
not going to worry about this, not going to do
Yeah.
this, not going to do
Yeah.
that. And so so it wasn't everything or nothing,
Right.
like we're not talking
Right.
extremes. But yeah, but in order to open up to be in my window of tolerance again, I had to like
Yeah.
throw all that ballast overboard, man.
Right. Right. And the reason that you didn't have to do it in every context is because there was something in a container with in certain contexts that allowed you to not have to protect.
Good point. Yeah,
So, and I want to just slow down to acknowledge that because, and
yeah,
Kathleen knows that I harp on this all the time, not harp in a bad way, but because we're such a binary culture and we're thinking about in everything's and nothings constantly. It's like to remember, like, oh yeah, I actually didn't have to protect completely. What I did is I used healthy discernment to be like, I can't do X right
right.
now, and to be able to be this Anna Maria, I need to have those boundaries, and then in this context, I don't have to be protected,
Right,
and my nervous system can have space and
right.
is to be me, right?
That's
And I think,
that's perfect. And I want to draw parallel to movement right there
yeah,
because I've had a hip injury going with because I've
mm,
had physical stressors too.
mm,
And so within movement lessons, then it's not about thinking like my hip is
mm,
hurt or my hip is well. It's more about thinking about here's what my hip can do.
mhm,
Here's where we're not going to go right now. And here's the contexts that work, here's the ones that don't. And you just start playing within that little by little, having faith that as you experiment more and more,
right,
slowly things start opening up more, which they have.
yeah,
Um,
right,
but it takes time.
right. So it takes time and discernment to consciously or cognitively consciously move with the opening and to not rush past what isn't actually open and available, which I think brings us back to your initial question is, and it feels like so relevant, like in certain spaces,
Mm,
we might need spaces for Black and Brown folks only. We
right.
might need space for non-binary or trans folks only. We might need space for people who have had miscarriages only, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, it could be anything.
Yes.
To honor the uniqueness of whatever, right? Not
Yes.
to fetishize or exclude or make less than, but to allow the nervous system to have its space to be.
Yeah.
Because in X places, our culture doesn't know how to honor certain aspects of personhood, and so we have to form containers that will, um,
Exactly.
and then hopefully we don't always we won't I think of like this invitation of, yes, maybe we have to do that. I hope we don't have to do that forever. I hope that at some point we can develop enough respect and honoring and discernment of our own prejudices and our own
Mhm.
biases and binaries, that we can be in shared spaces so that everybody feels safe, just not those of us who are at the top of the hierarchy that culture deems the top of the hierarchy, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And I think that in the micro too, like in the micro dynamics, like I said earlier, like we-ness is really soothing for my nervous system. And there's someone that joined in this live, and she is a balm for my nervous system, you know.
Yeah.
um, and sometimes, like I've been pondering this, like, can my system be big enough to hold hate?
Hmm.
And and can the love I have and the heart capacity and the depth that I have be wide enough to hold hate and not be go into protection, right?
Interesting.
To stay open. And it's contextual, right? Sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't. And
Right.
what do I need to do to stay true to my regulated brain and nervous system with regards to that? Sometimes I might need to pause and step out, or
Mhm.
engage in other activities. And I'm not gonna. I'm just not gonna have a full life if I only if I only require X response, right?
Right.
Um, but the reality is a reality, and like you so wisely named, with COVID coming in, you had to use discernment to know I
Mhm.
can't do X and I can do Z, and I'm going to do that for a little bit until my nervous system and brain are regulated. Then I'm going to open my space.
Right. And it's very interesting what you brought up. There's things I want to go back to, but most immediately, most recently, what you said um, brought up for me the fact that if we're going to hold hate in a state of we-ness,
Mm.
I think we need to also make space for healthy aggression.
Oh yeah, and I'm thinking, just to clarify,
Yeah.
I'm I'm actually, yeah, there's so many layers to just that, right? I'm particularly thinking of, I'm not thinking of like heart space and we-ness with Nazis right in this moment, although I have, I have protested Nazis and I've had an open heart space with
Of course.
Nazis. And because that's how the only way I could protest. I could only protest from a healthy nervous system and brain
Yes.
regulated space. So I
Yes.
had to connect to unity mindset.
Hmm.
um, I don't want to engage in activism from fear. It just doesn't work for my system.
Right.
So, and at the same time, I'm not actually, I wasn't looking for we-ness with Nazis in that protesting. I was looking for we-ness, a bigger we-ness, and that allowed me to not be engaged in a nervous system fear response with the Nazis who were carrying guns and knives and dogs
Yeah.
ready to attack and snipers on the rooftops and et cetera and so on, right? So, but I'm actually thinking more of like my loves and my clients and maybe family members or people who are um, are just in pain,
Okay.
and are tired of this fucking culture that wants to kill them, you know,
Right.
and the very valid um, responses that come, and I don't even know if they have hate. It's just like a label, but
Okay.
there's a rage or an anger,
Yeah.
and I want to allow them to have that because it's valid based on their experiences. I don't
Hmm.
want to collude. But I also, like I was sharing with the group yesterday, I have immense privilege, so much privilege in the work that I do as a professional, but also in the work that I've been gifted with or had the resources to pay for. I have
Hmm.
been held through immense rage and immense
Right.
pain in my body, somatic pain. And I write about that. I've written about that over the years. And that is a huge privilege that I have received that, and then to be able to be somewhat of a rage midwife with my clients,
Yeah.
that's again a huge privilege that I have. And so I notice that when I'm judging, sometimes it's like, oh, Lisa, you have huge privilege here. Like, can
Hmm.
you also use my can I use my privilege to stay open while others are processing through something that you had tremendous support with in another context, and that's kind of what I'm getting at with my own personal journey, that invitation, and the invitation to have boundaries when I can't, and be like,
Right. Right. So I feel like we got away from the hate and we-ness in a way and moved into
yeah.
privilege. Or were you trying to
Well,
connect
but
it back to hate
there
and we-ness?
is, yeah. I mean, I think that there's we-ness in acknowledging privilege,
I see. Okay.
right? I mean, but thank you, because I hadn't
Yeah.
made that, I hadn't done that, and
Yeah.
so, but I think that when I do acknowledge the privilege that I have, it opens a space for we-ness.
Oh, good. We have a question coming in from Kathleen. How to hold hate? Would it be similar to how I handle self-hate?
Yeah, and I'm interested, Anna Marie, in your response too. I would just say, like, context is everything. So
Right.
with self-hate, it's like acknowledging, that's maybe a little easier, although it's still context dependent. As a person who's had immense self-loathing and shame,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, over time I was able to not collude with the self-hate and self-loathing, but be more of a in relationship, more in
Mm-hmm.
we-ness with that aspect of myself. That took a lot of, again, time and resources, and to be held through that, and then, yeah, to be able to hold the space for that resonance that comes up, that self-hate, and to not collude, to keep
Mm-hmm.
regulated as much as I can, to use all my practices, right? And so a way it is maybe similar depending on context. When maybe we can drop the word hate, but somebody's in a lot of judgment, or in
Mm-hmm.
a lot of um, um, like, arrogance, or like separation, or certainty with regards to another person, or a topic, then to keep myself regulated and not collude, and to not try to change them,
Mm.
just like we don't try to
Yeah.
change the part of us that loathes itself.
Right.
Like, to hold space for that part of us inside, and maybe to hold that space of somebody that's out, that's in our circle.
Yeah. It's interesting because I would, from in the physical realm, I would substitute the word pain.
Mm,
And again, there are the parallels because if I'm working with someone who has pain on one side of the body,
mm,
whatever part, right?
mm,
Um, Step one, respect the pain,
mm,
right?
mhm, mhm.
So, and clearly something happened, but we don't need to know what happened,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's
yes.
respect the pain, don't get caught up in figuring out who or what happened
Mhm,
so much as how can we work with it. And the way we work with it is by working on the parallel side, right?
mm,
So if we can learn on the parallel side, um,
mm.
what feels good, what's easy, what's comfortable, which is really wholeness or we-ness,
Right.
right? Because we
Yes,
we
yes, yes.
conceptualize ideal movement as evenly distributed, involving the entire body. Um, then that knowledge, that the learning will transfer in different ways. And
Yeah.
it's not automatic or immediate, but it's indirect, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think back to the times I've handled hate, and some of those same techniques were in play for sure.
Hmm. I like that. I like that you named, we don't have to know the how or the why. And
Right.
and there might be contexts where that line of questioning might be useful.
Of course.
And I think, like, you've named something that I've been trying to discern too, is because of the work that I do, like matrix work and all the levels of the matrix, I'm curious about perceptions. I'm curious
Yeah.
about fluidity. I'm curious about the ebb and flow of contraction and opening and separation and all that stuff. And for me, I invite myself to be mindful of, in what context am I asking those questions? Because in some
Interesting.
contexts, those questions are not maybe appropriate.
Right. Right. I mean, sometimes they are. If I keep having a burn on my hand, it'd be useful if I figured out that it was, I'm touching the hot stove every day.
Yeah.
I could avoid that. That's
Yeah.
useful. But if it's, and most things are, most complex, more complex,
Yeah.
it just gets, it ends up being a time suck.
Yes, and it can also, in the dynamic, can not foster we-ness,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So if we-ness is what's most important, and I think that's the tricky thing. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
because that's like the beginner's mind, like being in beginner's mind where there's we-ness. It's like, oh, that's just such a journey.
Yeah. It is such a journey. And I'd like to invite two new listeners, they're movement practitioners interested
Awesome.
in neuromovement,
Yay.
to chime in with questions or comments. We're talking right now about we-ness from Lisa's perspective, or wholeness
Wholeness. Yeah.
from the neuromovement perspective, and how
Mm, mm,
um, maybe giving up on having a story about what happened or what your pain is about could actually be helpful.
mm-hmm.
So,
I like to I love in some of my communities of practice we use the word wholeness a lot, and um, my students and clients know this, that what I mean by wholeness is not what culture means. Or let me take another half step back. So you were naming connecting to wholeness in a micro movement, right?
mhm.
And instead we think of whole. We want a binary and jump ahead to a perception of wholeness from head to toes, as if like, and that we'd only be in concept if we tried to do that, right? We can't. It's like there's
Okay.
just too many concepts of what wholeness means, and we accidentally and innocently will jump there. So, and I think in your work and my work, it's like, where is wholeness succinctly in this moment? Like, can
Mm.
we connect to it, like in just the elbow, or just
Mm.
the extension of the wrist? And I know, like, concepts are going to come in here because we're out of context, right? We're out
Yeah.
of the actual experience, and we're just talking about the experience. But to slow down and connect to wholeness as a micro experience
Hmm.
is really, really helpful for the nervous system and brain regulation, and also for body wisdom.
Right. That's what people say every time they get up off the floor. They say something along the lines of, I feel whole,
Yeah.
and it's a literal physical perception,
Hmm.
but it can also transfer to our thinking self, our feeling self,
Sure.
our whole
Yeah.
self.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is tricky to flip back and forth between that conceptual and experiential place.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this is something I have struggled with, because I don't think that we can actually exist from one place or the other. I think we need to integrate them both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts, experiences about that?
Well, I think I need to know more about. I want to make sure I'm on the same page with you about by when you say that we need to integrate both.
Okay, so I'm going to put me on pause,
Okay.
because I'm not the priority. I see that Kathleen has said something, and I'd like
Oh.
to acknowledge that. She says, yes, I love that. Noticing where it is somewhere. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be everywhere in our body. Helps me to be able to switch from unsafe to safe areas.
Yes.
Nice. Thank
Yes.
you, Kathleen. Yeah.
And like, so this is parallel to what you just said too. When you're
Yes.
working with a person, like when you might have worked just with a wrist, and then and I know you don't, but
Yes.
and then a person stands up and they're like, and really just the explanation for that on some level, we
Yeah.
might say, is that when our attention, when wellness is connected with the system, starts to mirror toward that. And I know it's a little different in your world, but um, I'll use my world just because I know it better than yours. But like, so what Kathleen is saying is, like, when we slow down to feel any, like, 1% of wholeness, and we really let our attention, because we're really talking about attention, orientation of attention, we let our attention orient to that 1% of wellness, the cellular network
Mhm.
is responding to that. And it grows and it grows and it grows, and it keeps moving. and then the brain is regulated, and then the nervous system is regulated, and so it becomes more. It doesn't mean that all of us from head to toe is X, or all of us from head to toe is Z, but what it means is a resonance has been released, so to speak, or
Yeah.
connected with, and that's not going to make sense to a linear logical
Right.
brain necessarily, but we can feel the truth of it, and that's what we want to stick with, is the truth of the experience, not
Yeah.
the rationalization or the mental understanding, because our mental understanding is never, well, I won't say never, but our mental understanding is limited based on wisdom's experience.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we started somewhere about talking about creating the conditions, right? Whether it's for
Mhm.
mental, emotional wellness, psychic wellness, physical wellness, whole wellness. Um, when you look at the stories of people who have had remarkable recoveries,
Mm.
um, they are orienting towards their well-being, but they don't all do it in the same way. They each
That's
have
right.
their
That's right.
own way of doing it, and they don't do everything right. Like some of them might still drink their glass of wine a day. Some of
Absolutely.
them might still have a cup of coffee a day, you know. So,
Yeah.
and it's all very individual, but what they've done is they've oriented towards wellness,
Yes.
right?
And
And
this like includes the anger or aggression topic, because orienting to
yeah,
wellness may include feeling our aggression,
yeah, and
feeling
expressing it
and
healthily.
expressing it, right? And my question is always like, oh yeah, what is it teaching us? Like, what are we learning? Like, it's here
Mm.
for, like, our patterning is here for a reason.
Hmm.
What are we learning from that patterning? Like, what are we, like, instead of
Oh,
judging that
interesting.
aggression or judging, it's like, yeah, you're like, let's be here and let's be cognitively conscious with you.
Right. And that's why, coming back to what you were asking before, that's why I say we can't have one or the other. Like
Oh
some
yeah.
people really get into the feeling side and they just want to feel, feel, feel. And some people are heavily cognitive, but you have to bring
Yes.
all of yourself to
Yes.
bear in
Absolutely.
order to bring it
Yes.
all together. And
Yes.
so it frustrates me to no end when people want to push us in one direction or the other. It's like,
Yeah.
no, just like
Yes.
we have a whole and we have parts and we can feel the
Yes.
whole in the parts, we can be cognitive to access our feeling side. I know
Yeah.
that seems counterintuitive. And we can be feeling to access our
No,
cognitive side.
they're linked, whether we like it or not. They're linked, and if we actually want to change neuroplasticity,
Right.
we have to include that. Like,
Right.
so I like, I come from a tradition of meditation, um, and that was very body centered,
Okay.
which I'm so grateful for, because there's such a strong push in this culture, a disembodied culture, to go up and out,
Right.
right? And so then
Right.
there's no conscious cognitive relationship with what's here,
Mm.
and then the neuroplasticity doesn't change. So you can be a meditator forever and still have this exact same patterning and never like have evolution, so to speak, or movement towards a deepening of unity consciousness, whatever we want to call it, self-realization, whatever we want to call it,
Yeah.
because that cognitive conscious piece isn't engaged in the somatics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Fascinating. Oh my gosh. See, we always get towards the 45-minute mark and it's like, this has been amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it has. Thank you. I feel like this is sort of the natural pause. We've
Mm.
covered a lot.
Yeah. Can I
Is
ask
there
you a
anything else
question?
you wanted
Yeah.
to? Yeah.
I just want to ask you if, like, what we've been, because we started today like with what's going on for me,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering like if what we wound up talking today is relevant for what's been going on with you.
It always is,
You're
right?
right,
I
right?
mean, if I'm me acting from within myself and interacting with you, it can't help but be about me because what I bring, what helps me understand you is my experiences, my feelings. As as we speak, I'm experiencing things in my body, I'm having thoughts, and they're all filtered through my experiences. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
This has absolutely been relevant to me and what's been going on for me. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Oh, good, good, good. Oh, good. And thanks,
And
Kathleen, for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks.
And the rest of you, yeah, I can't see all the
Yeah,
names, but
I can't read this right. Oops, clearly this earbud. Clearly this earbud does not want to be in. But thank you to everyone who has joined, and
yeah. Mm.
I can't wait for our next
I know.
walk
I
and
always love
talk.
our time together. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Anna Maria. Have a great day.
You too. Be well. Okay, so I won't touch that for now, but yay!